Golly gee willikers! Welcome to the Crash Chords podcast, everyone! Is this gonna be like this from now on? Cause I don't like it.
I can only do
I think John's in shock right now. Look at him. He doesn't like it either. Or he doesn't know what to make of it.
That's exactly
the latter, probably.
Yeah, that's
the former, I understand it. The latter is what's more puzzling.
The latter is also what you use to get to higher places.
You're in a mood, aren't you?
I'm infectious. Wait, did I say that out loud?
John?
Yes.
Yes.
I don't know where that came from. Okay.
And infectatious, too.
What?
You're trying to create a word where there is none. I can sense that.
That's my job.
No, that's his job, not yours.
I can help.
Anyway, welcome to this week's episode of the Crash Chords podcast.
Yeah. No big announcements this week that I can think of other than we're actually forming a plan to write more, so hopefully there will be more articles on the website.
Yeah, we keep promising this, and now we actually have ideas, and we're just going to see if we could actually do them.
That's your plan, right? To put us on the spot there. So now
it hasn't worked before.
We're up there for posterity.
We're on the spot.
It hasn't worked on before.
Week.
I've put us all on the spot for weeks, and it didn't do diddly.
I appreciate you trying the same thing over and over again. It's bound to work. Really.
Right, of course.
Really, that's time tested.
I'm still working on that Romeo and Juliet thing I said.
What Romeo and Juliet?
Like months ago.
Oh, that's right. You were comparing a certain album, album's
Hello,
theme.
Goodbye?
No, it wasn't a Hello Goodbye.
No.
It very well could have. Oh, no, it could have been.
Might have been.
Could have been anything. I don't know. They all blend together, don't they?
But I was dissecting Romeo and Juliet and the problems with it. I had a couple of free hours today.
See, it's a long way to go to compare an album's arc to a Shakespeare play. Because they're two different things. And we actually had this discussion back in episode 50 when we're comparing music to other art forms. But music does not always match its arc with that of a play. That of a film.
There's nothing saying that it can.
Can, but it's much tougher. And normally it's not done intentionally. So if you're trying to find it and it's not really there, it's almost not worth it.
But I can usually find it. I'm good at that.
You can force feed
I wouldn't say good. I'd say you have a 50-50
I can
record.
pull back the veil and glimpse the unknowable.
No.
He's really just self-aggrandizing, isn't he?
A little bit.
I like that word, self-aggrandizing.
And considering it is his album this week, we might as well let him kick this off.
This week, we reviewed the 4-track symphony. I don't even know how to describe it.
4-movement symphony, first of all. Because it's a symphony and all.
It is a symphony?
Well, it's titled as a symphony, so yes.
Yes,
it's
a symphony.
Symphonic, choretic... I don't even remember half the words we were using.
Well, I don't... What?
It is Orca by Serj Tankian, his 4th studio release.
It's actually, the full title is Orca Symphony No. 1. In theory, alluding to the fact that he will be doing more of them.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that coming from him, especially... He is an industrious guy, I'll give him that. And apparently he has a jazz album out too, so he's not only industrious, he's versatile. So he can do just about anything he sets his mind to, it seems. And I will say there's no ifs, ands about it. This is a symphony. Because you were about to ask me, John, well, is it really a symphony? But it is a symphony. It has quirks of what you'd find in contemporary classical, of course. And it also has quirks of what you'd find in a cinematic score. So in this time, I do think he's going for something fairly cinematic. Of course, you have to treat it in itself and not as a cinematic score, because at present, there's no movie to go along with this. So,
though we
treat
are
it strictly from the auditory.
We are fairly certain that Disney would be the ones to write this movie.
You know, I didn't think that initially, but there are definitely moments where it seems so quirky that it's downright playful. But then again, at the same note, it can be really tragic. Really, really tragic. Like, beyond that of what I would expect from Disney, to be honest.
Including...
Not saying that Disney can't be tragic, but there was a level of seriousness here.
Come on, Dad. Come on. We gotta get home. Come on. Simba, Mufasa, Lion King. everybody still cries.
And I mean, even think Pixar, Up. The first half hour of Up was so horribly depressing and adult.
Bambi. Let's go old school. Bambi.
Yeah, well, I guess we'll take apart those sections as we come to them, and then we'll determine it from there.
But from our first part, Victorious Orcanus.
This is
the first movement.
The album is separated into 4 movements, which are also labeled 4 separate acts that each have a title. This is very unique from anything else we've done before, because we've never really done a scale symphony like this.
Yeah, it's funny that I was prefacing this earlier by saying that music doesn't always match that of a Shakespeare play, but yet he does label them acts, which is abnormal for a symphony. Usually the movements just speak for themselves; they're not always labeled acts, and each one of these has titles.
Well, clearly he wrote this, even if it's not, like, if we don't see it, he wrote this to be somewhat theatrical, I think. Between the acts, how it's broken up, the titles, it feels very theater.
I would probably go cinematic instead.
Okay.
Because, theater, you could go either way with theater. I wouldn't say it's a musical. That's
well,
for
no,
sure.
but that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying it's theatrical.
Yeah, so.
If I were to think of anything, it would be that short that Disney did with the airplane, whose name I cannot remember.
The airplane?
The guy throwing the airplanes.
The paper airplane.
Yes. Which is if okay, everybody watching or listening or whatever.
It was the film short before Wreck-It Ralph, The Paperman.
Yes, watch that.
Ah.
Which was very good. Actually, one of my favorite things Disney's done in the last decade.
If you said
is that.
Pixar, then I probably would have thought, because that was Pixar.
No, Wreck-It Ralph. That was all Disney.
Oh,
Wreck-It Ralph and Paperman were Disney. 100%
That's news
Disney.
To me. You can see why I thought it was Pixar.
Well, because of the computer graphics, but
and
actually
also
is
Disney
not.
has bought out Pixar, haven't they? At this point,
they are still separate entities.
But they are still separate entities.
Kind of like Marvel and Star Wars.
A separate division, but Disney might be a blurb somewhere in the credits.
Wreck-It Ralph was strictly Disney. It wasn't. It was the first non-musical Disney movie in a long time, but it was strictly Disney. There was no Pixar influence.
Interesting. Well, just before we get into the first movement here, I do want to mention something about the name, because the title of the entire symphony is called Orca, and Orca, as John figured out, is type of fish or whale.
Not fish or whale. It is a porpoise.
Yeah,
part of the
actually
dolphin.
Specific about it.
It's actually Orcanus orca, the killer whale, the big black and white animal that's everybody thinks is actually a whale, but is really the biggest dolphin on the face of the earth.
So it's not far-fetched to go into it thinking it's a whale.
And just a little bit of Natural Geographic knowledge on y'all. They are one of both the most dangerous sea creatures. Not the humans, surprisingly. There's very few human attacks, but they are really vicious, hungry, predatory creatures. Yet also very loving, caring. They have a language, not immensely definable, but they do communicate. They do have very personal and recognizable identities. And the reason for this choice was, as Serge put it himself, the orcas, to some extent, represent the dichotomy of man.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely see that when you compare, of course, the capacity of love against the capacity for hate and warfare. Of course, that's sort of a humanity 101 kind of thing. Yes, we are capable of both, and I do want to talk as we go through this as to how well this symphony really delivers that. So let's talk about the intro first.
So I mean,
the intro. Well, yeah, you started.
I was going to say all I was going to say was that the intro, very, very from the very beginning, is strikingly beautiful. It's piano piece, kind of solo at first, and it only stays on its own for a very short amount of time.
Well, at least as an intro, I thought of this almost as 2 intros. It depends on how you want to view the organizational structure of this symphony here, because most symphonies often start out, their first movement here usually starts out with what's called a sonata form, which is typically it's along the lines of you get a primary theme, and you can have an intro before that or not. It's really kind of up to you, really, as a composer. And then you can have a transition, and then a secondary theme, and then usually closing material, which borrows from both themes and sort of wraps it up in a big way. And you could think about this in a couple of ways here. I tended to think of the intro as being in two sections. You have an intro, that light piano theme, as you were talking about. That
playful.
That's almost the
playful
intro
theme
to the whole entire symphony, the way I see it. It
Yeah.
is playful, but it sort of rumbles, it's kind of rumbling on these basic chords here.
It's somber at points. It does have that higher key work, but it does... Each section of the progression does have a darker downturn on the note play.
A little bit. I mean, I thought the piano part was pretty basic, a little bit cut and dry, perhaps, for something of a symphonic scale. It's 1-4-3 flat 2-1. It's kind of textbook in terms of prefacing an epic theme with dark undertones. So I see what you're saying. It delivers that. It mostly delivers that. Although it's mostly in C minor, there is a melody there, just hovering overhead, that I believe was the oboe, and it places an emphasis on the Phrygian mode, which gives it that sort of general Middle Eastern feel, which you will feel in certain places throughout this album. Although Phrygian really corresponds to Turkey, which isn't far from Lebanon, and Beirut, Lebanon, I believe, is where Serj Tankian was born.
He's also an Armenian American, and
see, that's interesting.
Actually still lives in that area.
He was born in Beirut, but if he's Armenian, that's kind of interesting. But yeah, over there.
But talking about your oboe, it was also coupled with those woodwinds, those not quite punctuating, backdrop-oriented woodwinds, and eventhrougly merges with
an oboe is
work.
a woodwind. So you have that. Your oboe,
there is a lot of brass,
woodwind
a little bit of brass
here.
thrown in there as well.
Yes, that's true. But I do think the beginning of this is very heavy on the woodwinds, at least as far as the intro is concerned. You're talking about driven by oboe quite a bit. Also, bassoon. There's a lot of call and response nature going back and forth between oboe and bassoon. The thing is, this whole intro section, especially right after the piano part really finishes off, it's very thin. It's almost like that of a chamber ensemble. Not what you'd expect from a symphony. Not that they can't get soft, at times, but it starts so softly you'd almost expect this to be some kind of sinfonietta.
And that's what leads directly into the violins. And when those first violins, those first strings start hitting, it really does start to energize the piece. I felt it actually starting to pick up. But that doesn't stay there.
It did start picking, and I felt that it was still picking up even within the intro itself. I didn't even think we were really at the primary theme yet. Like that pickup is you're talking about. You just look at a few things here. You've got the oboe, you've got the bassoon, you've got these little flute punctuations. So yes, it's very light in the beginning, and then yes, the violin comes in. Maybe even been a viola in there. I did like some moments in here. There was like a little rising glissando in there, which did kind of provide a little bit of a uniqueness. That's sort of like a slide for a violin. Just a little rise there. Gave some personality, I think, to this intro.
Give it a little bit of pep.
Right. But then the point which you're talking about, the point where it picks up is right after that. It's all within the intro, and it just seems to get very ominous, very fast. Faster than you'd expect, considering you've had almost 2 stages of beginning itself by now.
And that's because it kept in those high flute-oriented woodwinds and brought in deep drum rumbly chords.
Exactly.
With slowing down the violin, which really de-energized it, which brought the whole tempo down while remaining within that same time frame. And did really just scream darkness.
I almost called it Elfmanian, if we can use that term now. Danny Elfman. Elfmanian, Elfmanic, whatever.
It was reminiscent of his stuff, for sure. There were tones of that in it. However, with the changes like this, it almost made the first listen seem like it was a bunch of small pieces as opposed to one overarching theme. And I think on the second listen, we kind of found the threads that pull it together. Right. But they're not so obvious on a first listen. It's very easy to lose that main theme.
Which is why that introduction, which at first glance did seem like an introduction and a separate piece, but that introduction really did have very much a closing kind of a feel towards its end before we get into that first theme.
Oh yeah, it swells and then it recedes almost immediately.
And it feels like a finale for that piece, and it wasn't actually a piece. It really did not propel itself the same way this first actual theme does.
Well, that's the thing. That's only why I felt it was too big too fast for me, because I could understand it being sort of like that overture material, like, okay, this is a sign as to what you may get later in the symphony, but it was a little bit too big, especially when you consider, just like you pointed out, John, bringing in the percussion. When you bring in percussion for a symphony, that's a very, very bold move, because it's so obvious in the face of what you expect to be going on, which is, of course, orchestral material. You expect to be hearing violins, woodwinds, other sections. So then when you bring in the percussion, which is usually the big kettle drum, it's never anything...
We've talked about this before.
Never anything you can't ignore.
Yeah, we've talked about this before. When you bring in a drum like that, he's usually in the room over, just because he tends to overpower the rest of an orchestra.
Yeah, well, it depends on how it was recorded, and that should also be noted that this was recorded in a studio version as well as a live version.
And this
we listened
piece,
to the studio.
But this is, for an 9-minute opening track, this was the solid 3 minutes. It really was.
This was about 3 minutes of intro, as I would consider it.
And then it does go into the first theme, and I do enjoy this first theme.
Yeah.
Because it was, you've got an upright bass being plucked, upright bass or cello. It's coupled with that really distinct piano that from Harikiri. That punctuated beat work that he uses in Harikiri, his previous work, but it's now being used as a piano piece, and it's really, I do enjoy this. I like what he does with that, to bring something a little bit different than what I was expecting.
See, I have to wonder if you're talking about the same section, because the primary theme here, I thought it was quite beautiful. This was a very slow section. You could tell me if we're on the same page here. These really long, drawn-out notes across the full, 3/4 measures. It's almost like a waltz of the damned. Sort of a dirge unto itself, but we're still in the primary theme here, so it's not quite too dark. I'd call it just flat out beautiful.
No, that precedes what I'm talking about. That is that closing transition into theme 1.
Yeah, then we're not at the part you're talking about then yet. This is all just the primary theme here. This is much more toned down from the intro, from the big intro close that we got. But it should be noted that this picks up again very, very rapidly, just as the intro did. So the same theme sort of repeats itself, but this time the instrumental components are just placed on steroids. The percussion, again, it's all over the place. The brass comes in, and I think this is what you thought I was talking about before.
It's much more energized.
Yeah, much more of an action sequence.
This becomes the core theme that I like in this. This becomes the core of the theme I really enjoy. And it gets comped exceedingly well. That bass really gets comped by the piano and by the violins. And I love that deeper current that it creates. And then it gets reimagined with the horns. And then it gets reimagined with the piano.
Exactly.
And I love that reintroduction kind of a feeling that he's going for here.
So that's why we were a little bit off the mark here, because when you count the intro with this primary theme, it brings you well past the middle, the halfway point of this movement.
It
brings you up to 5 minutes plus. And then we get sort of a weird transitionary section that leads us into the secondary theme, and that's what you were talking about, John, which you could describe again, Ed.
The secondary theme is really somber. That's truly what it becomes.
I would agree.
It's more a combination of just the voice of the piano and the violin just really feels dejected. And yet that really becomes almost an adventure tale at the end of it, which is the oddest part.
Well, my biggest problem with this section of the song, and it's where they kind of lost me, is towards the end, around the 7.5 minute mark. This slow, beautiful piece just jumps disjointedly into this sense of urgency, this lead up that's just completely unnecessary and out of left field. It makes it sound like it's almost a completely separate song.
Well,
and an urgency that I felt wasn't earned by the slow part. It seems like two separate pieces.
This is something that didn't quite get me yet. I mean, I understand what you're talking about, and I do think that is a problem later in the symphony itself. But in this first movement here, it's true that you get a lot of different things, but I mean, I think in the end, you can still boil them down to this primary and secondary theme. It's like, again, as John said, it's reimagining. It's reimagining it using different instruments. And sometimes those transitions are so abrupt and so sort of complex. You know, the figuration is completely off. For instance, that pizzicato, the upright bass pizzicato, is that's actually the first time you hear it, it's a little bit sudden. It seems like it's something totally new, but then it comes back later throughout the symphony. So even that, if you look into it, it's a motif.
But this closing section, which is a reimagining of the first theme with a little bit of the introduction's higher energy thrown into it, really shows how the first and second theme are just a little bit too divorced, because the transition is very abrupt, and I don't really feel like a flow between the two. I don't really feel like a transition so much as a stop and start. And for that really just pulls me out of what was being made in this opening.
Right, and it's on those grounds where I agree a little bit more. See, that's the thing. There are abrupt transitions here. It's just, it was that stop-start nature, which I don't think is the same as abrupt to me in a strange, abstract way, that made this negative in that aspect.
But it becomes
very strange.
It's soft, boom, not any preceding.
It's two pieces that were put together. There was no transitionary material in that moment. It's just very much soft, and then instant urgency.
Well, that's the thing, and this is where I bring in the other way to analyze this first section. The first movement here, because when I started thinking about this, I actually thought that the second part of the intro was perhaps the primary theme. In which case, it would be extremely brief. It would just be the end of. It would just be from where the chamber ensemble heads into the larger, more brassy-like section.
Which is like
and then
30
I would
seconds.
consider that would to be a transition, but that would be a much more appropriate transition, at least, you'd admit, into what we're now calling the primary theme, which would, at the time, be the secondary theme. That's one way to analyze it, but then you have to look at the closing material of this movement to be pretty bizarre and abstract and very jumping around. But then
still harkens back to
that's
the
the
primary.
thing. You can always take liberties with closing material. You can always borrow from whatever the hell you want, almost.
But by showcasing it within the framework of what the primary theme had created, it shows the disconnection between the primary and the secondary.
Well,
it shows that divorce
but
ideas
also,
between the two.
I will say though that after a second or third listen, I think Serj Tankian was doing a fairly good thing here as far as exposition is concerned. I think it actually gets the job done fairly. At least in terms of a symphony. You can't be too critical in this regard. He's writing a symphony.
What do you define by getting the job done? Like, what does that mean?
I think it does set up a story.
No,
I was a little
of course.
ambiguous about it perhaps in the intro. Like that very first swell, yes, I admit that was too big, too fast. But by the time you get 3/4 of the way through the first movement, I'm kind of okay with it.
Well, I mean, there's no denying that there's character and some kind of piece here that's being grown and cultivated, but I think it's just the way this is put together, it's almost incoherent and unclear as exactly what the goal is, what he's going for in this first piece. It's clearer in the later pieces.
No, I got it. I've figured out the finale.
The finale? We're not...
the finale of Act 1.
Okay.
It's right in the name, Victorious Orcas.
I guess that's something we'll be returning to later.
Actually, no. Now that halting, very abrupt nature makes sense. The Orca got his food. That was his strike.
So you're saying Act 1 ends with him getting what he was going for?
Yeah. The secondary theme was actually his stalking, hence the somber nature.
I mean, I want to be very, very careful about following this along with...
It's vague, but I really do see it now. I put two and two together and got that.
Well, I'm so glad you could get that after the fact, because it's
yeah.
I just want to be careful about following this along
prefaced.
so closely with the Orca. You have to take it from a musical perspective. And from a musical perspective, it's hit or miss. I think, in this first movement. And I was being a little bit inaccurate before, because when you consider a sonata, at least as it would be played separately in like a like a piano sonata or something like that, really has like these three larger sections called like an exposition, then the developmental section, and then the recapitulation, which sort of brings back elements from the former. And the development and recapitulation, I do see a little bit more inherent here in the end of this. But it's the exposition itself that wholly consists of that primary transition, secondary closing theme. It's, I think it succeeds the more and more I think about it. I just think that from a musical standpoint, from a transitionary standpoint, it could have been a little bit more graceful.
Well, that's my biggest gripe. That's essentially what I was saying.
Yeah.
Was that the transitions were lacking in the first act. The second act and the third act, they're better. And then, I don't even want to mention the fourth act yet. But, I mean, the thing also about this is, while I know the focus is to try and focus on the music and not get so caught up in the story, the reality is, not only is it called the Orca Symphony, but every track has something to do with the sea and with the orca and with this creature. I mean, there are references to it in every track, how it's written, so that can't be ignored completely.
All right. Well, there's just a couple more things I want to mention about the first movement before we move on, and there's some positives, because here's the thing: I think Serj Tankian is actually doing really, really well on the micro scale. I think that in the moment he's got an excellent command over voicing. I don't know if he had any help or whether he was solely in charge of all the orchestration, but it is quite intricate at certain moments, especially during the middle point of the first movement, sort of, I guess, what you consider the development, right after we finish that secondary theme and the closing of it, after the final swell there, we get something that's almost completely new. It's after after that brass transition, you get these little short rises in the lower register, the strings accompanying the piano with this little flutter, and then every instrument starts joining in the flutter, and they're trading off, and I thought that was totally engaging at that particular moment. And then, it's sort of a back and forth for sort of a tug and rope for a while, before we really get, I think, the recapitulation, the closing of this entire sonata form, where the melody starts hovering. The melody that you get in the very, very beginning starts hovering over this more rumbly backdrop. That's almost textbook in itself, but you can never go wrong because it feels very conclusive.
We're also getting something a little bit unusual from the layman's idea of orchestral work, and that is very, very little competition and very, very few instruments. We're not hearing full orchestras.
Yes, that's that thinned down nature I was talking about, the sinfonietta style, where it's almost more like a chamber ensemble in certain moments. Granted, when it swells, it's a full orchestra, and there's no question about that.
But I do enjoy that really no more than 3, possibly 4 instruments, not even sections, but at times instruments playing. And it's very individualistic. And I like that. I really get to hear a lot more of the texture of the individual pieces. And I'm really appreciative of that. I really enjoy that part of it.
Yeah, like for instance, that's something I also haven't said. There's almost a concerto style at play here. The idea that a soloist will take center stage and be featured throughout the piece. But the funny thing is, you can't say that it's a piano concerto or an oboe concerto. Like, yes, there are moments when they take center stage, but it's almost a trade-off from one instrument to the other. Everyone will kind of get their turn. You could almost conceive them to be the characters in this particular plot. In the beginning, it's the oboe, and then by the time you get the secondary theme, it's the bassoon. So there's sort of a call and response nature there.
Very jazzy in idea.
Actually, that is kind of a jazzy idea, the more you think about it. I don't think... It's certainly in form. Certainly in form, there's some influence there. So, then it kind of just ends in a big way. Gets very Elfmanian at the end with the dark swells.
I mean, it's very apparent that regardless of how we feel about the overall piece, it's calculated to a point, and he knows how to pair the instruments too. I mean, the swell, especially with the swells, it does blend together very nicely and give you that kind of oomph that you want to get from those swells.
Comping is definitely good. Comping is definitely very good.
Well, comping is a jazzy term, which I actually wouldn't say applies here. I mean, that's kind of written into the symphony style itself, that there's always going to be something complementing. So
then what should I phrase it as?
Well, it's a figuration in many cases, because it's not often that that active manner of complementing. It's usually something consistent. There's something that you can really grab hold of and say that's a definable pattern. Like, for instance, the pattern going in the upright basses when they're doing that pizzicato. That's something very definable. That's sort of what I'd call a figuration. So let's see what we get from Act 2.
So Act 2 is Oceanic Subterfuge. This is another one that has a very strong intro to start.
I put it one way, Steve put it the other, and I think we were both pretty much on the same wavelength. I called it vibrating, and I believe Steve said fluttering.
Yeah.
Yeah, which, I mean, two different ways of describing almost the same thing.
But it was enough.
Happy, too.
It definitely had a much more positive vibe to it, and
initially, anyway, for sure.
And it was also kind of unique in terms of the sound. Because let's take a step back here and look at everything that we've had now in Movement 1. As beautiful as it can be at times, we're really not looking at anything groundbreaking here.
No.
Not in Act 1. It's almost a textbook first movement in that regard. It's something that you'd find out of, at least in style, out of, classical tradition. But yet, it just incorporates cinematic themes. There's a lot of... I mentioned Danny Elfman, but I should also mention Hans Zimmer. Because I think even though it gets kind of... it has Danny Elfman's darkness to it, I feel like general action vibe really encompasses more of a Hans Zimmer style.
Well, and Hans Zimmer does his fair share of darkness as well.
It does, but it's more in that, well, for instance, just to look at the disparity, Danny Elfman did the soundtracks to the old set of Batman films, while Hans Zimmer is doing the
new
movie to the new ones. So, yeah, there's a transition there. But there was more macabre, I feel, in the earlier Batman films, and there was more action in the modern ones. So that should define the difference between the two composers right there.
Yes, I guess. I mean, but there are still, I feel like, those levels of disparity and darkness in some of the pieces by Zimmer. But
right. I'm just mentioning that because I think it's going to be something we're returning to here. But I enjoy
Before we go to that,
I enjoy best when he's not going down the route of both composers and following his own unique style, which I find in the beginning of this movie.
The woodwinds and the higher register violin work, very playful, very, very much a back and forth kind of give and take, as I like to put it, fighting but not really competing with one another.
Yeah, and the violins also went down more in the lower register of the violins, which is a nice mid-range to be there. It's indicative of rising action, I feel, especially at this point in the symphony.
And then goes, not directly, but still one of those more unusual transitions, I felt, into that piano work, which really did seem to try to go sad very quickly, very abruptly.
See, I disagree. I don't think that the sadness was that abrupt. I thought that the transition from the intro of this, though not groundbreaking, was more consistent and made sense, especially when it hit that 2 minute to 2 minute 20-second mark, where it became this gorgeous, heart-wrenching piece.
Well, hang on. I don't want to jump ahead here, because yes, I think that section, as you're talking about it, one might as well call that a secondary theme to this as well. I thought that was absolutely beautiful. But that was preceded by something that I thought was kind of tacky. Because after we get, and it was followed by the same tacky section, because after we get that flutter and all that stuff that I felt was very unique, it's just in the immediate intro, we get introduced to we get sort of a prelude to an action sequence, and then finally we get sort of the action sequence, which is driven by brass and by these sort of halting, steady beats that just define almost the most blandest of action sequences that I can possibly conceive of.
And I'm sad to say, the first thing that came to my mind was Neil Davidge's Halo soundtrack. It was very, very reminiscent.
Yeah, I don't know if he did the earlier soundtracks, but at least Halo 4 soundtrack, the one we reviewed back in episode 30.
And that was something I saw instantaneously for me. It was just tried and true, almost science fiction type of a setting, the way the instruments were arranged here. Like something we would have got from, like, maybe not as far back as 2001, but something you definitely could easily see in...
See, yeah, science fiction. I mean, I almost want to go more general action because there's just nothing for me to latch on to in the whole space vibe here. There's very little aesthetic. There's very little other aesthetic being placed other than just dramatic action. And that's going to be one of my main problems, I think, with this. But I will agree with Matt on a point here. And that's that after you get that big brassy, halting section that I find so annoying, it did sort of peter out in a way that was fairly pleasing. In other words, once it ran its course, it transitioned fairly well into the very, very soft section. And I think that was a good transition, so that once I get the soft section, our secondary theme here, I thought it was just gorgeous. Gorgeous. The section primarily, but the transition was fine.
So the gorgeous bit starts at around 2:20. I'm using mostly timestamps since the technical part doesn't always come to me. But this gorgeous section, the thing that really highlighted it for me is, in Act 1 we get emotion, but it's a smattering and it's kind of scattered. You know, they're there and you get moments, but not movements.
Yeah.
This, you get a full movement, a full almost minute of this beautiful, just heart-wrenching tone. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. It was almost unbearable how heart-wrenching this was.
And that was that combination of the violins and the piano and one of my favorite instruments, the clarinet. And it just did a beautiful, beautiful piece, beautiful figuration with one another that really did do soulful. And to have it surrounded by such high energy, almost bland action, if that's not oxymoronic.
And what's even more...
What's actually pretty funny is that I think in that particular instance with the clarinet, I believe that was complimenting it. Hilarious. Anyway.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm trying to use the word you
But the
teach
big
me.
problem with this section is it came and went too fast. And it comes back later, but in this moment, I mean, you get only 30 to 40 seconds of it, and then it's rushed right into that generic bland action again.
But I actually liked that. I did enjoy the preview because the ending... excuse me. Not the ending. The expansion that comes later is a nice, meaty piece of work and really goes in through some of the better harmonies on this album, on this piece. Some of the more beautiful instrumentation of this piece. This is one of my favorite parts of the whole symphony. It really became extremely expansive.
I'm going to agree with that.
Extremely expansive.
So here's the thing. This second movement, after thinking about it, is really kind of a split with me. Because I think it's the main way in which it suffers, I think, is already what Matt has described. It's that back and forth nature of this gorgeous section, which I would nearly liken almost to John Williams' main Schindler List theme, if you want to, just get a framework for that type of sadness. Because I'm not even joking, that's what I feel at this moment.
The full violin solo is heart-wrenching.
Yeah.
And what it goes into next, and I do love that reimagining with, once again, percussion, really, really deep percussive work, and just the whole thing just comes together and screams heartbreak.
Right. Well, that's once it really starts developing. But the thing is, you get teased a little bit. That's why I say that there's a back and forth nature in the beginning of the second movement with that beautiful section and that really kind of annoying. I honestly think it's like he just got interrupted by Hans Zimmer, as it was like Hans Zimmer just stepped in there and put graffiti all over this beautiful art piece. It's so polarizing, and I agree with Steve. It annoys me. And I'm not trying to completely badmouth Hans Zimmer here. I think he has done great work for certain types of art for certain types of film, for sure. It fits certain frameworks, and I felt like it just did not fit here. It's because you can't put a bland action sequence. It's hard to imagine a scenario in which someone would go from utter sadness and then to complete action. It's back and forth. That's a very, very odd transition to accept.
But I did, in fact, imagine this. I saw it as more of a scene work that is designing something while conflict is going on. You're getting heavy conflict, and a snapshot of tragedy. Then back to that heavy conflict scene and the aftermath of tragedy. That's like the only way I can liken it. And I know of scene work that does something like that. Doesn't mean it's good, both in the visual and the auditory art, but it is something that has been done before.
But explanation is not validation.
Exactly. That's true.
That's it.
In my opinion, while I understand that they wanted to separate this preview of the heart-wrenching bit to really give the full impact of that beautiful violin solo and piano transfer that comes later, it's still not okay. It's just, I don't like it. It's irking, and it
comes down to interpretation in the end, like anything. It comes down to opinion and taste and all that. For me, well, first of all, I want to say that I have no trouble thinking that this particular that back and forth nature, that abrupt back and forth nature, was completely planned and orchestrated by Serj Tankian himself. Because when something is so abrupt, you figure there's got to be an artistic reason for it.
Right.
But it's the whole piece is bookend with that vibrating flutter.
Yeah,
it goes slow, fast, slow, fast, slow, fast, with reimaginings of each piece.
Right, but I want to put it out there. It is always possible, of course, that there were two great themes, and they were smacked together. And, to a certain ear, I could see that disparity between the two. For instance, he was going for a dichotomy of the human condition, which I suppose is conveyed here, but again, in that Humanity 101 kind of way. Here's a beautiful thing, here's the scary warlike atmosphere. It's like, there's no transit, there's no gray area, which I feel like, if you're gonna explore the human condition, please explore the gray area. That's what I'd be more interested to hear, perhaps. Not saying there's no reason to do the extremes. This could be all about the extremes, but it would almost seem like there'd be two separate art pieces.
I think the extremes would have been strengthened by a better separation and transition. That's what I feel might have made it better. Like if the materials transitioned better, or flowed better, or had a better connecting fiber.
Or for instance, if there was a little of one in the other, like for instance the yin yang on the cover itself.
Yeah, exactly.
The Orca yang.
But we've gone on enough about that abruptness, because then we get to about the halfway mark of the song, and this is where the gorgeousness
peace.
The piece kicks it up a notch. It goes and revisits this heart-wrenching story, if you will, from the earlier in the song, but the violin takes a strong lead. You get a beautiful solo that's encapsulating and crushing at the same time.
It was that solo that really cemented this whole piece for me. Like I said before, it was that solo and the leading curtail, I don't know how to put it really, that lead in with the drum work that hit Schindler's List. That really did hit that level of just despair.
Yeah, and especially going with what you said before about this being the most complex, filled out section, and probably the maybe even the soul of the piece. I thought that his talent as an orchestrator was really showed off here, or whoever orchestrated, because honestly, this was expertly voiced. There was the main melody that we were introduced the first time we heard it earlier in the movement is just as strong as it ever was, and stronger in many moments because of how the harmonies are interplayed, the trade-offs of instruments and the swells. It really brings out that melody, which is something I don't see too often. In so many things we review, we come across moments where a melody is either there or it's not, and this is a moment where the melody. The soul of the piece, as I said earlier, the soul of the piece is often the melody, and this is a moment in which that is highlighted and enhanced using other instruments, using the framework at your disposal. I just thought this was an excellent example of that.
It was beautiful the way the violin solo almost seamlessly blends into a transfer to the piano taking over, playing the same melody, but making it its own piece of it.
Right. And I should also say that there are moments here where it almost doesn't seem to change for a while. And to be honest, I was okay with that.
Yeah,
because
was
that's
pleasant.
the thing. It's so pleasant, and I wanted more of that. I wanted to sit in a section and enjoy it for a while, and there is some spasticity throughout the rest of this that's just really hard to grapple with sometimes. I mean, I want to sit in a certain section, and when you're throwing me around left and right, there's not a lot of immersion there.
Well, I mean, but you did get to sit though in this song, especially after the 4-minute mark, where it really kicks into this beautiful piece. It's just after that he defaults back to that. I don't want to say terrible
That's the thing.
action.
He defaults at the very end.
It's not
here.
terrible. I mean, at the baseline,
No,
none
I'm
of this
gonna
is
say
bad.
honestly, even from an action perspective, like even if you're looking, not that I want to view this as an action film, but even if you are looking at it from that perspective, it's kind of a bad theme from that regard. In that regard, because there's so much else out there. You know, there's so many great action films, and it's true they're not always noted for their music. And Hans Zimmer perhaps is one of the few that really is remembered for his action sequences. And amongst other things, but you know, it's just I'm not sure it had a place in this particular in this movement or in this symphony here,
But
at least not in that style.
Well, yeah, but this won't be the last time in this symphony that we have displaced action or intense moments. I mean, I feel like Serge really has a grapple on emotionality and trying to convey a certain feeling in parts, but in overall, I think he just gets bored or schizophrenic or both.
I think no. I think it's coming down to he's trying to show what he claimed to try to show, which is the dichotomy. Words are so hard, but if he's using this word, this is his direct quote. He's trying to show that to his best of his ability. I think if he tried to show the union between the two, it would have made some of this higher energy more palpable,
right,
in regard to the.
That's exactly what I said earlier regarding exploring the gray areas. That would have palpable would have been. That's a very good word for what could have been gained here.
And I think mentioning lack of gray areas is actually the best way to put it, because it is very sudden black and white. You know, there's no gray in most of it.
I will say that the final build, though, to that last section was pretty gorgeous. You had the brass complementing in the background. That was actually quite a nice touch. The piano drives most of the percussion toward the end there, and it ends almost with the same flutter from the beginning, with a more kind of those brass harmonies that I'd liken to the kind you'd find in like Victorian era stuff. And I like that. I just didn't like the those halting beats that were peppered throughout this movement.
It just didn't feel like it had a place in this movement.
Yeah. Like kind of a corny villain, almost.
Almost. I mean, it wasn't that cartoony, but
no. I will attest to that. It felt like the classic. You could say good versus evil or high versus low kind of a deal. This is Superman and Lex Luthor original conception, kind of a dichotomy.
All right, well, how about this? There was that low tone that the whole movement ended on. I believe it might have been a bass clarinet. That is the corny villain.
That's fair.
Which leads us to something else corny. Act 3.
So Act 3, Delphinius... I can't.
Delphinus Capensis. And it's kind of sad I can say that.
No, that's the job that we gave you. You should do that one.
You had to say that one.
This actually is the biological term of the common dolphin.
So
there we are.
Right off the bat, something that, is different from the others is the intro to this song it was so disappointing.
It was pop.
It's okay. You know those moments. Just to say, there's moments where the piano steps in there, and you're like, "Ooh, this is not one of those times." A piano began a third movement to a symphony, and it was very, very bland, very basic. It was pop. It was a 4-chord progression, and I didn't want to hear it. And
it's just late. I feel like, especially after all Serge has shown us at this point, this is just laziness. Like, I can't think of any other reason why that would be there.
Because, not that I'm down on all 4-chord progressions, but even just like the one that was chosen at this point, it's the minor 1, major 6, major 3, and major 7, leading back to that minor 1. It's actually called, throughout certain circles on the internet, the sensitive female chord, which is pretty funny when you really think about it, and its place in this piece. Because it's the kind that you'd find in, let's think of an example here. Joan Osborne, What If God Was One of Us?
Yeah.
It's the same exact chord progression. So what's that doing here?
It's just
I'm trying to think of a framework in which this is useful, because, maybe it's a time for sensitivity here, and I'm not going to try to harp on this too much, because once the violins overtake it, you're not really that focused on the fact that it's a 4-chord progression, but even the violin, that melody, is really, really bland by comparison. So it's almost like a non-intro.
It could also harken to the actual title, The Common Dolphin.
Common? The average everyday dolphin who just listens to pop.
It actually it's referred to as the common dolphin. That's actually the name of that species of dolphin. Like we would have a basset hound. This is the common dolphin.
So, okay. But
maybe he's purposely going mainstream.
Going mainstream for the dolphin's sake.
Well,
the common dolphin who listens to pop.
This is how far the orca has fallen. I don't know.
It's so
I don't know.
weak.
Or is it another character?
No, well, I will say...
Could be another character.
Possibly.
Supporting character, perhaps.
It could be. But
the goofy comic relief.
We have to give Serge credit. He's a very, very smart man. There probably is meaning here.
No.
He probably was going for it.
No, of course there is. I'm just saying there's better things that could have been done at this moment in his epic.
This is me doing devil's advocate, because I really found it bland, and even worse for me for this beginning was that really, really abrupt build.
Well, here's the thing. I found something else about that 4-chord progression, which I didn't even mention to you earlier, because I wanted to wait for this bombshell. Because it came to me after I'd already mentioned all these Hans Zimmer, that sounds like Hans Zimmer, that sounds like Hans Zimmer, in its execution of the epic action sequence, whatnot. And this 4-chord progression is actually called the Hans Zimmer chord, by another circles around the internet. They call it the Hans Zimmer chord because it is commonly used in this exact aspect. Perhaps, of course, in his case, not toward the pop aspect, but as a basic 4-chord progression while you do all these swooning strings over to sort of allude that there's epicness where there is none. And,
Yeah, but
there's the content at this point is a little bit weak. I feel like the story has not been linear enough. Certain characters, i.e. certain melodies, have not been expanded enough, except the one that we really, really noted, for me to really accept this at this moment.
And also saying the whole bit about he's an intelligent guy, so this has to be planned. Baloney, because I know plenty of intelligent people who do stupid things and make mistakes. I'm not saying that this is a mistake or that he did something stupid. I'm just saying that his intelligence is irrelevant. The fact is...
It's artistic...
Yeah.
Artistic choice.
I'm
not really on board with it at this moment.
Yeah, and artistic choice isn't always the most intelligent choice. And in this case, I just don't feel that it was. I feel like, clearly, yes, of course, he probably had a purpose to this, and he was going for something.
Look, I have a feeling that when we walk out of this review at the end of the day here, we're all going to be able to say, okay, yes, from a goal standpoint, he probably achieved exactly what he was going for. But the dichotomy is clear. In fact, the dichotomy is so clear, it's jarring at times. So, he got his human dichotomy down. But
yeah, it's just,
gotta take other considerations into account.
The journey, he's going to get to the destination. It's just parts of the journey that could have been better planned.
Yeah, so it was at this moment where I was really kind of confused about where I was in this piece at the moment. The melody itself was just kind of general. I actually thought it felt like the decisive moment, perhaps, when a hero is going to undertake his challenge. As in, there's nothing really going on, but perhaps the moment psychologically has been reached, or you're on your way to the battle, and for some reason the movie is showing a bunch of landscape sequences as you're on your way to the journey. It's not really a moment.
This is the scene in Hercules where they're singing Zero to Hero.
Why not? Why not?
Sure, but
you could go there, you could go.
Except in that, there's great transitional material, both visually and chorusly, that leads the transition and the progression of that story.
That's the problem, in my opinion, the framework. You lack the framework.
Exactly.
The transitions weren't great in the other two pieces, but here, they're barely existent at all.
There was no moment prior to this where I felt like the necessity for doing such needed to be reached, and there's really no immediate battle that comes right afterwards. Tricky.
The thing about it really is that because of these weak transitions, you almost feel like you're being forced along this story. You're not along for the ride. You're not even sure you're on the same ride. You might be 3 cars back.
You're going from that really basic piano with those almost do nothing violins into that really abrupt build, into military snare drum, into happy-go-lucky violins again, like this.
You get
that,
that's
the
the
other
thing.
thing.
You get another 4-chord progression in there, which is a little bit more positive. It picks everything up, and I just
the military snare drum also is it's very, very military. So it's not joyous, it's not sad, it's just very military.
Well, see, that almost fits the idea that I put forth, that there's a journey here, and now you finally reached the moment, the crux point. But see, that's the thing. Once it turns positive there, once you go to that second 4-chord, this is about 2 minutes and 30 seconds in, when everything just gets so positive. It's a different set of chords here. I think it was F major, dominant 7th. The pedal starts going down, but everything stays so generally upbeat that it's hard to accept that as that crux point, that battle in which you're in fear for your life. No, it's just again, I'm just postulating as to the frameworks that I've been given, because once you give me something like that snare drum, it's like, well, all right, I do expect something fairly militaristic. There's just these emotion changes, which again might fall into that dichotomy thing, but I don't understand. Like, and also to say
that
not a person I know.
No, yeah, and to say that there's a crux is, I mean, also very loose, because there's no real turning point. It just goes from thing to thing to thing to thing.
Well, it's like that movie criticism where you have to believe your character. If you don't believe your character, then the movie's really, really going to suffer. Even if it's a off-the-wall character, there has to be some element there where you understand the circumstances that happen to him or her in order to lead them to the place where they might do that really off-the-wall decision. I'm just not understanding any of this progression at the moment.
And we've listened to pieces that are shorter than this, that give us that hero's journey and feel in shorter time with more conviction.
Yeah.
Whereas here, where we're almost, they're going, it's the hero, hey, he's the good guy, get on board, and you're just like,
You know what really does that the best was that really fast piano work towards the latter part of the piece. The really kind of tapping piano, the light piano. I like that when used in other places, and here it just fell flat, because that can really do a great job. Well, see, that's actually high-end energy.
Might have gotten a little bit
a lot here.
Might have had a little bit of a discrepancy in order here, but yes, that was actually when the snare drum comes. First, you get the whole positive 4-chord progression, and then you have this massive drop-off, this awkward, if not outright bad transition, because everything was just so sudden at this point. Probably one of the most abrupt transitions in the symphony, to that piano rumbling, kind of in an auditorium, but that was the part that was actually accompanied by the snare drum. And then, after that, it did take somewhat of a positive turn for me. And I mean that just in terms of there being new material, new ideas. That piano, as you're talking about, sort of rolling on that same figuration, but sort of changing the pedal tone a little bit, started adding some interesting textures in the flutes overhead, which was almost minimalistic. Like, and I know this name comes up a lot in our past podcasts, but Steve Reich, that minimalist. It reminds me yet again of that piece, Music for 18 Musicians, which seems to be a running theme in my life here.
And I looked at it as I was. There's 2 words that came to mind when I was listening to that. Metronome, monotone. That's all I was getting by that point.
Well, it is fairly monotone. That's the minimalistic part. It doesn't really change.
I felt like I was watching how things are made, and they were showing me how toothpaste gets in the tube. It really hit that level of just kind of mind-numbing. Oh, that's how they do that.
See, now, just to talk about aesthetic here, because we're going to get into this later in our topic, is that the emotions, the things with certain motifs, certain figurations will bring to mind, can often bring up little things in your past. And that, for instance, we are right on line with. I hear that modernist element, like how things are made, or a factory at work, almost like the educational videos you'd find, the clips you'd find on PBS back in the 80s, when everything was just so positive. Industry, factory work, right? And you'd have this, they would sometimes use like very basic computer tones in order to make that that figuration. Almost the same thing that the flutes are doing here. Really interesting to hear an orchestra doing that same style.
It would have been great if they had gotten Leonard Nimoy to explain the laser disc.
Oh, that would have been so cool.
That would have been it. That's the level we're hitting here. That's the level. It was, yes.
For those who don't know, that's a commercial from the old
we talked about it on
1979. Yeah, that probably came up probably back when we were with Gary and Nick.
But that's like the best part of this piece is a nice, monotone, informative infomercial.
Well, that's the thing. Again, has no place whatsoever.
It was completely divorced to the rest of it.
I really did like it. But it could have been something... It could have been a whole separate idea.
It could have been a great introduction to something better. It would have been a great transitional piece to something else.
That's what I'm saying. There's nothing really wrong with what he's doing in terms of orchestration. I think orchestration is just top of the notch, really. It's just the choices that he makes, I think, are they throw people off. At least they threw me off. They seem to have thrown both you guys off, so there you are.
It just wasn't enough to save this piece, I feel. And I mean...
No, it doesn't save it.
And then, I mean, even after that, I mean, first of all, the way that he wraps up this track, to me, is just so cliche. It was just a cop-out. Especially considering that everything that came before it, I just felt like he could have closed this piece with some kind of interesting flourish or done something.
It was one of those moments where, it just kind of... It did expand on the same melodies from earlier that were vague in the beginning and they're still vague now. And I think it's more suited to the background of a film at this point. Not when anything particular is happening, but when you're just trying to sort of not set a scene, but just paint a scene. Almost impressionist in that regard. Maybe.
But what's he trying to do? Finish a montage?
And
what's going on here?
And the reality of it is we're not watching a movie. We're just listening to this.
Well, I will admit, some of this did evoke just impressions. This
didn't. This part falls flat. You're almost bored by the end.
There are moments where it varies in the very, very end. The chords start to get very, very sad in moments, and I think that maybe it could have been controlled a little better. The problem, again, is framework. Those particular sad chords, as this movement starts petering out, they could have been highlighted. But instead they were just kind of dropped.
They just drop off, yeah.
Not just sad, but actually sad.
Yes.
Emphasis.
Sad with reason.
Yes.
Yes, which we got earlier, so we know he's capable of.
And we actually do get later.
Capability is not a moment, not a question at all.
Yeah.
So, let's move on to Act 4.
Lamentation of the Beached.
All right.
First of all, okay, I gotta put this out there. Steve taught me a new instrument today, and now it has become one of my favorite instruments, the duduk.
Duduk. Duduk. I don't know. I actually don't know how to pronounce it precisely, but it's an Armenian instrument, which again, Serj Tankian is Armenian American, so I'm sure he has some family influence here, or perhaps he just takes an interest in his roots in this regard. But I gotta say, this is the most Middle Eastern element that we've had here since the first movement. I want it to be a positive because it's a defining feature of this symphony. It's insanely unique. It stands out so far above the rest of the goings on that you're drawn to it almost hypnotically, and yet I can't call it a defining feature because it's the fourth movement now. We're at what should be the crux, and we haven't had that style since the first movement. When I first pointed out that there was a little bit of work there off of the Phrygian mode. Just that intro. The intro of the very first movement. We had this, and we haven't had it since.
And what's a real shame is that the duduk, becomes, to me, and I think the two gentlemen on my sides here agree, became the voice of an orca. It really does evoke that sort of super sub underwater harmonics that you see in, your National Geographic specials. What's so disappointing is, considering how beautifully it's used, that could have easily have been the orca. It could have been the voice of this symphony.
It is, and because it also sounds very mournful, and this is probably the first time we're really going to start employing arc here. I mean, at least just in terms of the title, Lamentation of the Beached. Obviously a beached whale, the orca, and it is kind of mournful. I mean, obviously you wouldn't want to be beached, and there's of course that wailing, no pun intended, that a whale lets out, which is almost really sad.
And you would think
Almost
that
really.
because the context is so sad, that it would be sad throughout, considering the situation. There'd be this direness, this urgency.
One would think.
But no.
With
so
every yin,
about
we
30
have a yang.
About 30 seconds into this track, it gets this almost playful conflict completely out of place of this kind of almost tick-tocking kind of feeling.
It goes, bra, bra, da, 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 yeah, high energy, tap, 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 high energy, tap, tap.
What was that first part again?
And the problem
it's
with
so weird.
So the problem with this
Oh,
is that there's so
gosh.
many gorgeous moments in this piece, but it just starts with this ridiculousness and then pursues this ridiculous on and off throughout the entire piece. From this piece, it goes into a very beautiful. I don't know how to describe it. It's just
It's the duck and the violin.
the piano.
Sort of trading off
together.
between each other, yeah. And then later on, the whole string section starts joining in with the duck as
And
well.
truly beautiful.
Yeah.
This one actually evoked some imagery for me. It was sort of like the idea. It became the idea of like fallow fields, like true destruction of nature. It really, really was beautiful to me. It really did something for me.
Yeah, well, I will say something about the back and forth nature here. It made it a lot easier to analyze from a form standpoint. I'm nearly certain this is a textbook rondo here with the forms. If you break up the part sections, A, B, A, C, A, a bacca, what you could call it that. It's think of A. Well, first think of an intro, which we disregard, and then think of an A as being that fairly annoying section. With I believe it uses wood blocks on that point where you called it like a clock mat,
Yeah,
almost like a tick-tocking.
Yeah, almost back and forth.
But yeah, it's probably the only bit of humor in this piece. Well, I take that. I was gonna say in the symphony because there is humor earlier. There is playfulness here, but this is just ridiculousness.
Well,
it's absurdity.
That's
Actually,
why
at this point.
I said it was ridiculousness, because it just seems so out of place considering the sincerity of the other parts. It just seems so out of place, and I don't know if that dichotomy is supposed to put you so unnerved.
Well,
but
dichotomy is the word of the day and the word that defined this piece from the horse's mouth, so that's the thing we have to accept. Also, there's some connectivity going on here, because this is almost the same exact problem that we were experiencing in the early part of Act 2.
yeah.
Same problem. Something really annoying, something gorgeous.
But this was like I could
Back and
endure the annoying parts of Act 2 just because there was still some connectivity. This just seems so divorced from each other. It just I just didn't see any connection between them.
Yet at the
No, it's
same
true.
time as all this high conflict going on, when we get to the beautiful parts, I'm actually picking up reinvention from the theme work of the first piece of Act 1. And that might have made it worse for me. That might have actually made what happened here worse, because we had a connection. Now we're actually getting the introduction of the symphony reimagined and presented to us in just beautiful ways, without the connectivity of the duck and what it actually did here, without the with this shoehorned high energy, and then. Okay, in our C section, and this is something we've talked about before, there are two distinct moments of silence that really are heart-wrenching.
Silence is a powerful thing to use, and
he just hits it like the perfect moment to hit mute. I love them, and but messed up, just pure-fledged messed up with what's going on around it. It just hurts.
Though I will say that you noted the C section, and the C section as a whole I thought was beautiful, and thankfully it is the point which I think was he sort of reveled in for a while.
Yeah.
He that was probably the longest section of this piece, and yeah, it starts off with that light pizzicato again, reminiscent from a few acts earlier. This very soft violin melody, in place. That's what makes this sort of distinctive from section B with the where the duduk is dominant. But it was gorgeous. It was gorgeous, and I wanted so much more of it.
Well,
they returned to it. It did last. I'll say it lasted, but it returned once more. You had to return. I mean, I suppose if you're completing in rondo format, you got to return to A at some point, and they do. And it's the same goofiness that the piece kind of ends on. The symphony kind of ends on.
And he uses the best parts of Victorious Orcanas to make that C section.
Yeah.
He really integrated it so well.
Because the C section pretty much has this beautiful partnership between the duduk and all the other instruments that had been playing up until that point, the violin, the piano. It
truly becomes a voice.
It really does. The voice had not been stronger than this moment. But the problem is that even though you have this beautiful dirge going, it still goes back to that A section that should have been gone by now. It just doesn't make sense to close with that A section.
Yeah.
It just seems so bizarre. I mean, yes, I get it. Dichotomy, you want it to be polarizing. And if that's what he's going for, then great, he did it. He did. But it's just not what I'm looking for.
That's polarization without art.
Yeah.
At that point, to me.
Or it's art without the musicality to back it up.
Yeah. Well, I should never say without art. Everything is art. But
yeah.
It's,
musically, it's not what you or I don't know anyone who would be looking for. I can't imagine someone else listening to this and going, oh, that sounds great.
Yeah, I don't want to harp, but there are an infinite other number of applications that I could think for that section, which, well, it's the A section, but we might as well just call it the ridiculous section, as we seem to have dubbed it. For instance, that playful and yet sort of sporadic nature feels like it would really accompany almost to a T the kind of action sequences that you would find in more lighthearted film, like a Disney film, right? There's usually an action sequence in Disney films.
Yeah.
It's nothing the kids can't handle, but it's always peppered with a lot of vaudevillian comedy, where the villain is falling over himself, or you've got a little side character who's sort of meddling and making things a little bit more difficult for the villain in question.
Or at least Dopey Dwarf has shown up, and there's jokes.
Exactly. But it's so brief. It just goes nowhere. I hesitate almost even to call it an A section, because it's practically a soundbite. It occurs once, and that's it.
No,
there's no development of it at all, and there's no integration. So I really do hate, considering what we've said about the symphony so far, that we have to close it on that note.
It just seems like such a bizarre place to end. It really does.
It does. I mean, you want to work your magic, John, and swing this into how the human dichotomy is
seriously. I can make an argument for this, but it's convoluted and it makes a lot of liberties on just the idea of what he's going for here.
Yeah,
I see what he went for. I see the art he was attempting, but there's just I want him to just stay sad. His sad is so beautiful. His forlorn, his hopelessness.
It was the most affecting parts. Were the sad parts.
That was actually that's a revelation for me. I didn't even realize that initially. That really is the soul of this piece. There's very little that I'm drawing from the, as I call it, the action sequences, or from the playful sequences. They're very superficial. They are, exactly.
They are very superficial.
Perfect.
There for effect and nothing else.
Or to provide variety.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in closing, I'll start. It was, oh man, the most heart-wrenching depths of the darkness that is here, and there is some darkness here in just theme work, not that angry side of the darkness, but that really hopelessness side, just really hit some beautiful levels. It's Hamlet level. I mean, it's really like Macbeth level, but it's kind of like at points you got shoehorned with, Donkey from Shrek.
Yeah, I withdraw my earlier statement about the Shakespeare act thing. I do believe you can convey that in music. It just needs to be, needs to be kind of tailor made.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, it's like instead of instead of Hamlet, being Hamlet, he's got Timon and Pumbaa stuck next to him.
That's pretty much it.
And yeah,
I want to ask: is that the human condition? Is that what our lives are?
No, it's not. Otherwise, things would be really messed up. But okay, yeah, it's got dichotomy, but I don't know if it's the human dichotomy it's showcasing here. I think it's just showcasing two very different ideas that were a little forced in coming together. Because the composition is there. He really does a great job of putting pieces together.
Right.
Even the parts that are distasteful for us are really just well designed. That's just not what we wanted. The Finis was the disappointing part, but there was a lot I did like about Act 1 and Act 4. And it really was touching. There were parts that were very touching. It was interesting. It did have a lot of modern feels, and I saw the influence of his earlier work here. His earlier ideas, because I'm a huge fan, so I was able to be nitpicky. And this is obviously outside what I would know of as his comfort zone. So that is just, ballsy. But balls won't get you quality. I enjoyed it as a whole, and in lots of moments, but there were parts I didn't like. So 3-5. It's really, really good where it's good, but it gets bad where it's bad. So yeah, quality just not enough. 3-5.
Stuff like this is tough for me to judge. I mean, I like my fair share of classical and instrumental stuff, but as I've gone on record saying before, you have to be a specific kind of composer to really hook me emotionally without lyrics. Because I do find a lot of emotion in lyrics, which is sometimes why bands like him goof me up, because their lyrics don't denote the same thing their music
does.
Thank you. With this, however, it's like, I mean, it's not bad. Duh. Serj Tankian didn't do something bad. Okay, great. Moving on. It's, sky's blue, he writes okay music to good music. My biggest problem with this is clearly he has an interest and a talent in this. There are moments that are so gorgeous. Without words, you pick up exactly the emotion he's trying to convey. That said, it's clear that he had an appetizer sampler. Little bits of things he liked and stuff that he wanted. And he couldn't find a way to use them on their own. So instead he created the appetizer sampler symphony. He created something to put these things together. Things that you would think would go okay together, but in practice, not so much.
Okay, I gotta say, that was awesome. I like that. Appetizer Symphony. I really like that.
I mean, it's just, he's plucking...
Appetizer Symphony with Humanity 101.
Essentially, yeah. I mean, that's
what we got here so far.
And I don't know, I just, it's no secret that I like Serge a lot, and I grew in and out and then back into System of a Down. They matured, and then his solo stuff has been even way more mature than a lot of the System stuff. But I don't get that maturity here. He shows his noviceness, and that could just be because he is actually a novice at writing symphonies. And there's nothing wrong with that. And there's enough skill that I'm interested to see what he does. I hope there's an Orca Symphony number 2. I want to see an evolution of this. I want him to fine-tune this. Because there's good bits here. The Sad was so heart-wrenching and beautiful. If there was a whole piece on here that was just that, with the right peppered transitions, that could be a competitor for most emotional song of the year. But the reality is it's so just disjointed, especially in that final, damn you, Abaca. Damn you. Because that song...
The rondo got you, didn't it?
The rondo, it was really terrible. The whole song, I mean, I like that middle bit, but it's so hard. You have to get through the bad to get to that middle bit. It's just, what's the point? Because it kind of ruins that whole overall emotion of that song. It really does. It's hard to stay invested in that sadness with those ridiculousness peppered through it.
Mm.
So that said, it's not average. But then again, for symphony, yeah, I think it might be. is it better than average? Considering the symphonic work that's come before it, I don't know that I could rate it that much better than average symphony work. And that's not a bad thing for Serge, since he's not typically writing symphonies. You know, it's not below average, but for me, there's so much exceptional symphony work out there that I just feel like because of the mistakes made, it just falls a little bit above average. It's a 3.25 for me. It barely makes it over the cusp of average because there's so much symphonic work peppered with other interesting things that I like so much more.
Well, I will disagree with you on one point. You said that it wasn't mature for him. I do think this is mature for him, at least as a goal. I mean, he outlined his goal for us. For sure, we might not have picked up on that had we not had his quote to go along with here. And in fact, if it weren't for that quote, we might have even been a little bit more harsher, because then the dichotomy would simply have been abrupt. And we're kind of harsh on abruptness, because, not to say that you can't pull an abrupt section and stir emotion. Ideally, that's what abrupt sections should do, and maybe that's what he hoped for. But even that requires context of some kind. And the context is what's lacking here. It always seems to go back to context. I am probably the most versed in symphonics work here of the three of us.
Probably.
I
Definitely are.
I enjoy listening to this kind of thing. I love hearing orchestral instruments because I think their capacities know no bounds. And the fact that mainstream media doesn't follow like contemporary classical compositions, I think is kind of a shame. Although the appetizer symphony, as you put it, Matt, that mainstream culture does get is probably from cinematic music. That's really what I think mainstream media understands the best, because everything's laid out for them. If you see what's going on screen, then the music is just is accompaniment. But I do believe that music should speak for itself, and this is a really, really strange case, because this was intended as a piece where the music should speak for itself without the cinematic nature, and I almost feel like I need some kind of movie to tell me what's going on. I need something on screen telling me the human dichotomy, and I hate saying this because I hate to be one of those people. Like, there's a lot of people I know out there who go into classical music with that regard. It's just like, well, I feel like there should be something going on, and it's always that, come on, open up your ears, imagination, bring out your imagination. But I'm sorry to say, this is just something I can't do that for. I think that the ideas are flushed out with a cinema in mind, and that's just not there. In other words, it begs a little bit too much from the listener. When certain sections occur, you're just meant to sort of take them for what they're worth and put the pieces together yourself. But the pieces, it's kind of a difficult puzzle. If you take the 4 movements here and you try to piece it together, you will merely find little motifs here and there that blend it. And more so than that, it's the things that are different, drastically different, that really strike more of a chord. For instance, the fact that the duduk comes out of nowhere. I love it. I really do love it. But I can't wrestle with that fact, the Middle Eastern element, which I by all means thought that would have been here from the start, from the first movement. It should have been a persistent element. It should have guided this piece and maybe provided more aesthetic for it, which, again, we're coming to in just a couple of minutes. Aesthetic, I think, was the lacking moment. I think that's where he was all over the place with. Where am I, in the thing? If I don't have a story, then I just have a cacophony of aesthetics. So, it's a sad thing. Because on the micro scale, I really, really, really enjoyed what he was doing. I think he's incredibly skillful at orchestration, at bringing melodies out, beautiful melodies, and highlighting them. I just think it's that next step that could have shown a little more maturity, as you put it, Matt. But I gotta give it some credit for that orchestral work. 3.6. Yeah, I'm using the finer decimals down in the 3s now. I had to for this one. 3.6.
3.6. Okay. Yeah, I think, and also part of it is a disappointment with I mean, it's Serj Tankian. We've just come to expect so much from him, but the reality,
it's a hero letting you down a little bit.
A little bit, but also the reality is, I mean, I've heard plenty of classical music. I might not be as trained in the finer points as Steve is, but I know when I'm confused, and I'm confused, and that's the reality of it. It's so disjointed.
I've heard dubstep classical composition that was less
confusing,
than this.
But speaking to what Steve was saying about aesthetic, I find that
just quickly before you begin, I do want to say that's that high art form, which is why the reason I claimed it was a more mature piece. I do think that if Serj Tankian continues going in this direction, I think there will be a unified piece with the same maturity that was found here.
I agree.
So, in a sense, he was sort of shooting for the top. He was shooting for the. Not only am I going to compose a symphony, but I'm going to have a greater theme here that will be present in all of the
subsequent works.
Exactly. Well, so I mean, inner workings, melodies, and so forth. It's that part where he failed. But I don't think that's a sign of immaturity. I think that's a sign of just maybe short-sightedness.
Yeah, I guess it's fair. I mean, but short-sightedness, you could be short-sighted. Yeah, I mean, they can go hand in hand quite easily. But you did mention aesthetic a bit, and I've been thinking about something. So I'm a person specifically who music informs a lot of my life, my work, my play, what I do, my hobbies. A lot of it is very much influenced by music. But what I really started thinking is, do people's tastes in music sway the aesthetics they find interesting outside of it?
And vice versa.
I.e., for example, on a large scale, does the music you listen to and prefer affect the movies you see, the hobbies you go for, the video games you play, the decorations you put up, or how you decorate your home?
I'm going to interrupt you. I'm going to be abrupt right now. Ready for me, the abruptness?
Uh-huh.
I agree. I think it does 100%. At least in my life, that is 100% the case. I'll go into details in a minute, but I'm pretty much solidifying that as a yes right now.
And I'll say that it might actually be the other way around for me. More than anything else. And I'll use a specific example. The reason I like electronica is because of my video gaming. Is because of its pervasive use in some video games genres, and the fact I enjoyed listening to it while playing said games.
Well, see, now there's the thing. I think it goes back and forth for me as well. Like, I think both are true. It's not so much one or the other. I think it's that one will breed the other depending upon whichever I get first and whatever I happen to associate it with. So for me, just an example, for instance, is aesthetics like time periods and art forms of certain times, like 1920s, 1930s Art Deco. I love that. So of course, if I like a piece like George Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, which I've heard since a very, very young age and grew to love, that might be inspiring my love for that said art form, or vice versa. It kind of depends when you look at what you were exposed to first. Sometimes that's hard to remember.
Well, I mean, but I don't think there's a definite one only influences the other. I think that it's true of most hobbies or interests. They influence each other. I mean, the reality that anyone who grew up playing card games or board games probably will like some semblance of other strategy games if they're video games or whatever. But, I mean, for me specifically, I'm a plethora of pop culture knowledge, and I was raised on both the classics and plenty of pop music. So I think that informs a lot of my pop culture taste. The fact that I like a lot of pop culture movies and references is because I like that pop of, trivia knowledge, almost, if you will. And that's informed by listening to a spectrum of popular music.
Maybe it's the road less traveled for me, but I tend to go toward... I guess I'm kind of that same way around culture in general that isn't so much in the public eye at the moment because I want it to be in the public eye. If I don't see something every single day, And if it's something, especially if it's something I like, I want it to be there. I want it to be present in things that I'm watching. Who knows? Because I don't always like, what pop culture does to old-fashioned things. For instance, since I was talking about Art Deco before, a book like The Great Gatsby, right? And the way in which the modern Great Gatsby was done, I'm not really a fan of, because to me that's something that should be integrated with the aesthetic of the time, and the aesthetic at the time was 1920s pop, and yet it was infused with so much modern music. I understand that's modern culture's idea of reimagination, but a great story that for all intents and purposes Leonardo DiCaprio could have... I haven't seen it yet, personally. It's just, honestly, it is the trailer that turns me away from it, because it's the aesthetic that turns me away.
Yeah.
It's that music itself. Leonardo DiCaprio could have done a great job. He could have been Gatsby to a T. Everything in the book could have lined up with the book, and the story could have been perfect. But yet, if the aesthetic isn't there, I'm not going to be 100% on board with it. It's very important for me.
And yet, I'm still trying to figure out if I could think of anything like that.
Well,
I can't really think of anything in my life that I feel like music has actually influenced me to either like or dislike.
Well, I think this is a general discussion of aesthetic at this point. It does not have to be music, but music is sort of... I'm not going to say at the core of aesthetic, but it makes me feel a time, perhaps better than many other art forms do.
Well, it's like when we discussed John Williams, I had said that was a time where music did influence at least an interest. Like hearing the snippets of the soundtrack for The Book Thief that we listened to, just because we knew it was his newest work.
Right.
Liking how that sounded and how beautiful it was made me go, well, maybe I should check out this movie, when I had not really had any interest before.
That's, I think, why we had our whole John Williams special back in episode 69 with Nate Ryder, because John Williams, I think, has an aesthetic unto himself, and that's why we sort of just swoon over him, and that everything he touches turns to gold, because there's so many stories out there, or so many movies that could have been made, perhaps, with different composers, that I just don't think would have had the same edge had he not been in the composer's chair.
But I'm going to say, I don't think one influences the other. I feel like you can't really divide that A equals B, or A leads to B. It's not really an ipso facto kind of a situation here. It's more of one and the other at the same time. Because of the associations between the two, I mean, just think 1969, Woodstock was the first thing that comes to mind. Tie-dye. Vans. Drugs.
Wasn't going to be the first thing that came to mind, but
these are all things that people will think of iconically. You think, Jimi Hendrix, you think, marijuana and tie-dye.
I think Janis Joplin would have been my answer to that if you hadn't spoken ahead.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. There's the whole things of... I'm just making a point here. Like, it's just association-wise, there's just every sense just gets everything else associated with it.
No, I actually think you're making a very, very good point there, because, in the public eye, it's really just what you get and see and hear simultaneously. So, I think it has to do more in that point with the type of person you are. There are people who like to, for instance, just the difference that me and you outlined, Matt. By looking at pop culture and wanting to be sort of a pop culture encyclopedia, essentially, you're very much in the present day, right? A lot of times I do feel like people have that idea like I would have belonged better in a certain time period. In reality, I kind of like the time period that I'm in right now, because having certain things like the internet and all these other modern amenities allow me to be so versed in so many things simultaneously. A luxury that I probably couldn't have afforded in like the 20s and 30s. But yet, I like how that was sort of on the rise at the time. Even to go back further, 19th century stylizations. Now that would be a little bit more trickier, because that's harder to associate with music, because even late 19th century, you're talking about multiple types of art forms here. Are you talking about the classical music that was around the late 19th century? Or are you talking about sort of the ragtime that was around? Because those are two very, very different things.
Well, I will say the first thing that when you say late 19th century, I'm thinking The Taming of the West, and actually, to be frank, and I'm thinking ragtime's true roots with the Western upright piano and girls kicking out on stage.
See, now this is a discrepancy of aesthetic. In this case, we're not aligned because I often go more toward... I either go
I think
toward...
vaudeville, first and foremost.
First and foremost, huh?
Yeah.
I think maybe it's because I have classical knowledge now. Maybe, it depends on how, 10 years ago, who knows what I would have thought. Because I actually did grow up playing ragtime on the piano, so that is definitely there in my mind.
But you're on a different continent from me.
Well, yeah, I was probably more in Europe, because the thing is, Impressionism is really where my mind goes now. The whole, Bohemian Paris scene of Claude Debussy, and later Ravel, that kind of thing, is really more what I think of these days. And that, to me, is just it's an aesthetic association. But it's not to say that I don't also think of New York, for instance. I'm a huge New York buff, so almost anything pertaining to New York art forms, which are ever-changing and very, very versatile, I have a closeness to.
Well, you're also one of the first to point out an urban setting. You or John both are very quick. If something sounds very urban, you're quick to identify
I said
it.
that in the last episode, actually, with Machine Drum, because it was sort of following this sort of the chill wave atmosphere of it. Felt like the right blend of ambient and techno, that it was sort of right in line with that very dense urban setting. A lot of stuff going on simultaneously, almost overwhelmed by the density, and that's an aesthetic that I'm also very, very attracted to.
Well, I am actually, just as an aside, trying to find somebody who's done a Subway album, which I think would probably be something we could do uniquely. But sadly, not a whole lot of bent garbage cans and plastic barrels recorded for mass
How
media.
about Stomp?
That don't count. That's Broadway. That's a whole different
Actually,
beast.
Well,
it's not
Broadway
anymore.
is quintessential New York. It's not on Broadway
I
anymore?
don't think Stomp. I think Stomp is off Broadway.
Yeah.
Above ground and below ground, two very different New Yorks.
That's true. Blue Man Group 2, though, also.
Oh, yeah,
there
did
we
a lot
go,
of
there
that
we go.
style.
Oh, of course. I mean,
They were
aesthetic.
off-Broadway.
I mean, actually, what speaks with the most strength to aesthetic, is what we had discussed with Painless Parker when he was on it. When he's very well known in the steampunk community, at least locally, and I think he's been out of state with it as well. He's very interested in what would, if you took the aesthetic of steampunk, what would that music sound like? Because most steampunk music now is really just people who dress in the aesthetic, who play a certain kind of music.
They play a role, and that's that.
Right. But he wants to know, if I built instruments in a steam-powered world, what would those instruments sound like? What would those instruments be? And I think that's a way more...
You mean with your present knowledge
Yes.
in a steam-powered world.
But imagine, after a certain time period, technology stopped, but a thing is different, allowing this steam-powered world to exist. What would those sounds be? And I think that's a way more fascinating, aesthetic-fed way of thinking.
Well, I have no doubt that at the moment we're repeating the exact progression of a previous topic of ours, but based on that idea, it always reminded me of that alternate history author that I mentioned to you once, the Harry Turtledove, imagining how different timelines would have gone. And to me, that's just the same thing. So getting back to your point here, that's almost what you see in certain films like Sherlock Holmes, right? Well, of course, not. And I do mean the film Sherlock Holmes,
Right.
At this time, not the BBC series it's on, because that's actually meant to be taking place in the present day. But the blockbuster Hollywood Sherlock Holmes
With Robert Downey Jr.
With Robert Downey Jr. That seems almost to follow the same kind of that. It's not instruments, of course, but it's technologies that seem to have sort of a modern touch, because the idea is that he himself, Sherlock Holmes, is such a genius that he's ahead of his time.
Right.
But yet he's working with the elements in his time. So everything ends up coming out sort of modernist for the time.
When he invented the internet.
Yes.
I mean,
He did invent the internet.
Yeah.
Sort of.
in a manner of speaking.
Yeah. It's... This is becoming theorycraft.
well, I think the intelligent...
Oh, I'm okay with that.
I think the intelligent no, I don't want to say conclusion, because there's no conclusion to this. This is all very much opinion and personality fed.
Well,
but I think a big part of this is it's not so much does or doesn't music affect your other aesthetics in life, because the answer is yes and no. It can and it doesn't have to.
Well, I do want to talk about other things, because I guess I meant to be talking about time periods and how that gets made. You mentioned things like food. I'm curious about that one, because that's a tougher one.
So, I mean...
Well, if you're talking...
The theory is...
Spanish food.
No, that's stupid. That's too obvious on the nose.
No, but it's an obvious yes.
Yes, but that's not what I'm talking about. There's a theory that restaurants serving certain food types, playing a certain type of music, feeds the aesthetic. And I'm not talking about the obvious Spanish restaurant playing Spanish music. Yes, duh. If you want to immerse someone in a Spanish environment, you play Spanish music, feed them Spanish food.
Yeah, of course. And that's the great thing about being in America here, is we can kind of pick and choose from anything we want.
Like, we go up one street and we're in a different time zone.
I can go to a German restaurant and I can get bratwurst, and I feel so German right now.
But I have a specific cited example of where they try and mix it up. So I find that sushi and mostly Japanese fusion restaurants, they won't just play straight traditional Japanese music. Sometimes they do.
Right.
But sometimes they play J-pop. Sometimes they play, classical music. Sometimes they play... I find that a lot of them, based on what they're going for, whether they're more artistic, more fun, more party atmosphere, they'll twist it a bit. Whereas the food is still clearly Japanese.
Yeah.
The music more influences the environment they want to create with the people coming, that's not necessarily directly connected to the food that's being eaten.
But that's true. I find that the more highbrow sushi bars tend to feature much more ancient Japanese music, kind of stuff that's just been passed through the ages. You imagine yourself sitting in a Japanese palace or something like that. And then, of course, the modern, more kind of street side ones, J-pop, very
you're also talking about one of the most aesthetically intriguing foods to begin with.
Yeah. Well, because
sushi itself is presented to be edible to your eyes as well as your mouth.
Well, yeah, it's been said that a lot of the chefs who learn to create sushi, the way it looks is just as important as how it tastes.
Yeah.
Because if it doesn't look good, how could you possibly think it tastes good?
Well, that's also leads to something that's a little bit different, but cars. A car, in order to be powerful, has to sound powerful. You get in one of these hybrids, and you're going 60, 70, 80 miles an hour, and you don't feel it. But you go in, an old school, like 69 hatchback Mustang, you're going to feel throaty, and it's audio meeting physical. Right. I mean, that's where it really gets down to. You get a roar.
So you basically just plug the American muscle car and...
No, but I'm saying,
preaching, don't demise.
Oh, God, no. They're gas guzzlers. But it's
I'm all right with the... I agree with you, though.
A very, very visceral auditory aesthetic aspect.
No, of course. And I agree with you. I mean, gas guzzlers or not, if you are willing to pay that price, by all means, go get your gas guzzler muscle car.
But it's not the same without that throaty roar. It never will be the same without that throaty roar.
Yeah.
Even if they throw it on a tape deck and throw it in my hybrid, I mean, I need that.
I was talking about 20s aesthetic before. If I could find one and maintain it regularly, I would buy a Model T Ford in a heartbeat.
For then you shall be a gentleman chap and have a monocle and a full handlebar mustache.
Excuse me, Model T Fords were built for the common man. They cost $900 at the time. They were the least pretentious thing on the market. Thank you.
Yeah, but nowadays they would probably be the most pretentious thing you could possibly own.
I disagree with that. Cars from the teens actually tended to be much more for the wealthy. They had little brass trimming and all that fancy, all that jazz.
Pre-jazz.
No, right there in the midst of
right there.
Jazz.
That would be, the birth of jazz.
Yes.
They created all that jazz.
Also,
that was
with cars.
I think bringing it back to music, there's actually an artist who I'm hoping to bring on the podcast either as a guest if he's in the States again, or at least bring his music on, that actually takes an aesthetic and bends it into a modern twist. So his name is Mr. B, the Gentleman Rhymer. He's from England, and he does hip-hop, but with a proper British accent, very, and he takes this aesthetic, this, the well-to-do, proper British gentleman.
The guy we quote when we go, yes, indeed. Yes.
But still does hip-hop, which is a very street-savvy sound and created, obviously, in the streets. And he mixes it together, and it makes for an aesthetic that's very unique. He also plays a banjolele. It is a fusion of the banjo and a ukulele. It's a small electric banjolele. And
he electrified it.
But he also mixes that with beats and other sounds. It's not just the banjolele. He does layering and mixing, and it's just a nice, interesting fusion of aesthetics together that makes for a unique and enjoyable sound.
Well, see, that's probably the more interesting thing, like the creation of aesthetics. For instance, as an amateur composer, when I'm trying to write something, I don't always like just immersing myself in. I'm never fully satisfied with just immersing myself in an existing aesthetic, because as much as I enjoy immersing myself extraneously from actually composing, as much as I enjoy immersion, I do believe that there's a time for rehashing and there's a time for not. At some point, you just have to go original. So at some point, try to merge, try to figure out something that you deem to be a new aesthetic, because that's what's really going to drive imagination forward, I think. Especially if what you're saying is true, and that people, which I think we've already proven to be true, is that people do take their aesthetics and sort of play with them, mix and match. If they're going to be inspired by something new, you got to create new things. You can't just stick with what is.
That's, I think, a perfect way to kind of sum up everything we've been rambling on about for the last half hour or so.
Try new things.
Yes. But also try all the things. Please do try all the things, too.
Try all the things.
All the things.
All the things.
Yeah,
in fact,
versatility is probably the best.
At the same time.
Well, if you can, yeah.
Hibachi
go
sushi and burritos, which actually do work well together. I've done that.
Coffee and hamburgers, too. Really great.
Yeah, well that's diner. I mean, coffee. I mean, in an American diner, coffee goes with everything.
Oh, most people don't consider coffee to go with everything.
Cheeseburger and a burrito and sashimi walk into a bar.
Please stop. Please
nachos and wine, which I've had twice, and it was awesome.
Before. Yeah.
Okay.
I like shrimp.
I'm lactose intolerant and I don't like wine, so I'm not interested.
Oh, so sad.
Damn.
Anyway, I think this is
we're going your way now.
I think the tiredness is setting in. Why don't we wrap up? But I did enjoy this discussion and may want to revisit it in the future, maybe if we have Mr. B on. But why don't we have our spam mail of the week, Steve?
Yes, spam. I do not leave a response. However, after looking through some of the comments here, tragic dead ends, one less progressive, I actually do have two questions for you, if it's okay. Is it simply me, or does it give the impression like some of this responses look as if they've been written by brain-dead folks? And if you are writing at additional places, I'd like to follow everything fresh you have to post. Could you list every one of your social networking pages, like your Twitter feed, Facebook page, and LinkedIn profile? By Simpsons Tapped Out Donut Hack.
See, what I love about this is he's being self-aware and making fun of things that make no sense, like other spam comments.
It's actually a fairly common one now that we're getting.
But
that
what upsets me more is that the spam bot didn't bother to check that we do have a Facebook page and we do have a Twitter link. So,
that's the thing.
It should have blanket bombed us right there. I did like the fact that it's kind of a callback to the line from Mark III where the rabbit goes, "Don't try this at home, kids."
Yes, they like to stutter. Like, you think, that would be like the least bit of probabling. Wow, I made up a word there. That a computer would have is stuttering. Like, you'd think they'd just copy the word. It's in a free dictionary. You can extract.
For the fact that computers don't stutter unless they're breaking, that has been a prevalent part of computers' ideas and personifications in mass media for I don't know how long.
Has it now, really?
Yeah.
Okay, we're done.
Great.
So, because I'm not letting this conversation continue.
Oh, you don't like depth.
No, I don't like John's depth.
You don't like breath.
He's cavernous.
Depth of breath.
I'm cavern. I'm that. Wow, thank you.
Cavernous? I don't think John wants to be cavernous.
Anyway,
I'm a deep guy.
So next week we have Steve's pick. So what are we going to be doing next week, Steve?
I don't know, but
Alright.
he giggled when he found this.
Well, here's the thing. I never even intended this to exist, because this is a band that started out in the 1960s. They were a Brazilian band, and Brazil was kind of a hot place to be back in the 1960s. In fact, it's still a hot place to be.
No pun intended.
Yeah, yes. They got into psychedelic rock down there, like we did up here. But, of course, it's not just everyday psychedelic rock, it's Brazilian psychedelic rock. And, it's quite psychedelic, at least from the albums that I listened to and fell in love with. At least in terms of, let's throw out the word again, aesthetic, because it's just so bizarre. Again, this is a new thing. You may not like it, and frankly, I have no idea what they're doing now, because it seems like there's been several hiatuses, band returned, I'm sure that's not all the same members, so I have no idea what we're going to get. But the album's name is Full Metal Jack. And that'll be next week.
And what's the band?
The band's name is...
Oh.
You forgot that.
Os Mutantes.
Os Mutantes.
Or in Portuguese, The Mutants.
Okay. Well, that's interesting and stuff.
I'm still worried the fact that he giggled
Yeah.
when he found
I don't
this,
know that I've
this
ever
album.
heard Steve giggle before. Anyway,
And it was really evil.
as always, thanks for listening. We've updated some stuff on the site. New contact info. Please shoot us an email with questions and comments. Yes, I'm bringing it up again. We will be writing more articles, so stay tuned for that, putting us on the spot.
Oh dear.
And
This is my idea,
We
too.
don't mind.
What's
Yeah.
he doing to
We
me?
don't mind. We like being in the spotlight.
What am I doing to me?
with that, music is life, and life is good.